My mother-in-law spiked my drink at a family dinner. I watched her do it. She thought I didn't see. But I did. So I picked up the two glasses, smiled, like nothing had happened, and quietly handed the tampered one to her husband instead. He drank it. She saw it. And I knew what I had to do next. My name is Mariah Carey. I'm 36 years old. A behavioral research consultant based in Seattle. I work with educational institutions and nonprofits to improve the emotional intelligence curriculum for children, especially in underserved districts. I've always believed that prevention is better than intervention. That most damage starts early and invisibly. It's ironic, I guess, that I didn't see it coming in my own life. I married Trevor 6 years ago. He was a public high school science teacher when we met, someone who smiled at dogs on the street and never left a text unanswered. He believed in people, in community, in small wins. I didn't grow up with that kind of softness. So, I fell hard. We got married after 2 years. I met his family 3 months before the wedding. If I'm honest, I knew something was off from that first brunch. Evelyn, his mother, greeted me like a politician, charming, practiced, and just a little too specific in her compliments. Ronald, his father. I was quieter but somehow more intimidating. The kind of man who didn't say much, but whose silence landed like a judgment. I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to belong. So I tried. For years, I did what people do when they're trying to earn a place. I baked birthday cakes, showed up to every gathering, offered to help clean the dishes. I complimented Evelyn's table settings, laughed at Ronald's dry jokes about government inefficiency, even pretended not to hear the way they referred to my work as interesting. I swallowed it when Evelyn once introduced me to her bridge club as Trevor's wife, the one with the feelings job. I let it go when she gave Trevor a check for his birthday and handed me a scented candle, then told me it was just a little something. Trevor never noticed. Or maybe he did and chose not to name it. That was his way. Avoid conflict. Keep the peace. I don't stir the water. 2 months ago, Evelyn hosted a family dinner to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. She called it a special night for her favorite couple. I had just wrapped up a major pilot project in Tacoma and was running on 3 hours of sleep, but I said yes. Trevor was excited. He said it was sweet that his mom still made the effort. I didn't answer. The dinner was held at their home in Queen Anne. A 3-story craftsman with wraparound porches and a manicured lawn. Evelyn had pulled out all the stops candles, linen napkins, a framed photo of our wedding on the sideboard. She'd made stuffed salmon, Trevor's favorite, and played a playlist of songs from our wedding. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought she genuinely cared. After dessert, she asked me to come help in the kitchen. I followed her without thinking. There were 2 glasses of white sangria on the counter, not yet brought out. As I stepped in, I saw her take a small bottle from the spice rack and empty a few drops into one of the glasses. She moved quickly, but not fast enough. I didn't say anything. She turned around, smiled too brightly, and said, "This one's for you, sweetheart." My own recipe. I took both glasses and nodded. I'm careful not to show. My hands were shaking. Back at the table, I handed the drugged glass to Ronald, who grunted a thank you and took a sip. I pushed mine to the side, claiming I was sticking with water. 40 minutes later, Ronald was pale and sweating. He excused himself and rushed to the downstairs bathroom. The sounds that followed made everyone fall silent. Evelyn's eyes met mine across the table. For the first time, her smile vanished. In that split second, we both knew the truth. She had meant it for me. And now, she knew that I knew. I didn't confront her. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there, fork in hand, listening to Trevor fuss over his father and Evelyn whisper about bad shellfish. And as I sat there, something in me shifted. The fear I'd carried quietly for years calcified into something colder. I wasn't going to play nice anymore, but I wasn't going to fight her on her terms either. That night, after we drove home, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the untouched glass I had tucked into my coat pocket. Trevor was on the phone with his sister Claire, updating her on his dad's stomach bug. He said it was probably something he ate. Evelyn agreed. Of course. I let them speak while my mind ran in 1,000 directions. I had no proof. I had only a hunch and a glass that smelled like citrus, but had something faintly chemical beneath it. The next morning, while Trevor was at school, I drove across town to the small lab where I used to consult on behavioral testing trials. Jason, the lab manager, I had worked with me during a summer grant project 2 years ago. He owed me a favor. I walked in quietly, handed him the sealed Ziploc bag with the wine glass inside, and told him I needed a tox panel. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask why. Is this personal? He asked as he began labeling it. Yes, I said. And time sensitive. He told me he'd call me within 72 hours. I thanked him and left. My stomach twisted tighter than it had been in years. The next 3 days were normal, at least on the surface. Trevor went to work. I returned to my projects and tried to act like everything was fine. But my thoughts were a loop of questions. Why would she do it? Was it just me she'd done this to? Was this the first time? On Thursday afternoon, Jason called. His voice was quieter than usual. Mariah, he said. That glass had traces of lorazepam. Not a high dose, but enough to cause drowsiness, confusion, even temporary memory loss, if someone isn't used to it. I sat down on the floor of my home office and exhaled slowly. Are you okay? He asked. I'm not the one who drank it, I said. But now I know. That night, I told Trevor I was going to skip the upcoming Sunday lunch at his parents' procession, end quote. I said I was feeling drained and needed a weekend to decompress. He looked disappointed, but didn't push back. Mom will ask where you are, he said. I shrugged. She'll survive. He smiled faintly but didn't press. That weekend, I began to dig deeper. I opened a private browser window and searched for anything related to Evelyn's past. Her name came up in a few local foundation boards, PTA meetings, neighborhood committees. She looked squeaky clean on the surface. But the deeper I dug, the more cracks I found. An old neighbor had written a vague Reddit post 3 years ago describing a woman in Queen Anne who tried to get her disinvited from a school fundraiser after an argument about discipline styles. The post didn't mention names, but the street location matched. On a hunch, I called Amy, a former colleague of Evelyn's from her short time at a local nonprofit 10 years ago. We'd met once at a birthday party. Amy was hesitant at first, but when I told her I was asking not as family, but as someone who needed clarity, she opened up. Evelyn is dangerous, she said without hesitation. She doesn't yell, doesn't swear, doesn't throw things, but she manipulates, isolates, undermines. That's her game. Amy told me Evelyn had quietly pushed out 2 employees from their nonprofit years ago by slowly turning others against them, planting small lies, raising doubts about their professionalism. She makes you question your own instincts, Amy said. By the time you realize what's happening, you're the one being doubted. After we hung up, I wrote everything down. Every comment Evelyn had ever made that felt a little too sharp. Every backhanded compliment. Every time she subtly questioned my judgment in front of Trevor. I saw the pattern now. It was never loud. Never violent. But it was always there. Control disguised as concern. Disrespect wrapped in smiles. She wanted Trevor's life to follow her blueprint. I was never in it. I called Jason again and asked for the written report. Can I come get it in person? I asked. I need it for something, I added. He said yes, and I drove there the next morning. I slipped the envelope into the back of my desk drawer and stared at it. This wasn't about revenge. This was about protection. Evelyn had crossed a line, and I had let her dance along that line for too long. That night, I asked Trevor a quiet question. Do you remember the first time your mom didn't like someone you dated? He looked surprised. Yeah, he said. Why I waited. It was this girl in college. Her name was Mel. Mom said she smiled too much. Called her fake. He paused. Funny thing is, she was the nicest person I ever dated before you. I nodded, not replying. He didn't ask me why I brought it up. He never did. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep doing nothing. The more I pulled the thread, the more I realized Evelyn had been weaving her version of truth for years. It wasn't just me. And it wasn't just now. The pattern stretched far beyond that one dinner. I called Claire, Trevor's younger sister, who had been living in San Diego since her early 20s, and rarely returned for holidays. She and I had only met a few times in passing, and I remembered how distant she always seemed when family was brought up. I didn't give her context. I just asked if she could talk. She agreed, with a pause that said she already knew why. When I asked her about Evelyn, she didn't hesitate. She didn't spike my drink, Claire said flatly. But she made me feel insane for applying to grad school in New York. Said I was abandoning the family. She told Dad I was reckless. Said I was seeing someone unstable. I wasn't. I was just breathing for the first time. Her voice didn't break. It wasn't fragile. Just tired. She told me she left because every time she tried to do something on her own, Evelyn found a way to question it until she wasn't even sure if it had been her idea in the first place. You're not imagining it, Mariah. She wants to control the narrative, and if you don't play your role, she rewrites it. Without you. That call gave me clarity. Evelyn didn't just disapprove of me. She disapproved of anything she didn't construct herself. She didn't want me gone. She wanted me molded, quiet, smiling, digestible, and when I wouldn't fit the image, she tried to erase me. That night, I stayed up cataloging every conversation I could remember with her that had left me feeling smaller. I wrote them down in a blank document, not because I needed to prove them, but because I needed to stop dismissing them. The time she told Trevor in front of me that he looked healthier when we were taking space during an old argument. The way she corrected me when I talked about my work, saying I was in emotional theory instead of applied behavioral science. The time she invited Trevor's ex-girlfriend to Thanksgiving as a friend of the family, even though they hadn't spoken in years. I had spent so long trying not to make a scene, trying to keep the peace, that I didn't realize peace wasn't even on the table. It had never been. Evelyn didn't want peace. She wanted control, and if someone like me, educated, independent, respected, could be made to doubt myself, what did that say about the quieter targets in her orbit? Janelle, my closest friend, and now a hospital resident, had seen me through worse times. I called her the next morning. You need to stop pretending this is salvageable, she said. You don't fix people like Evelyn by showing them you're good. They don't care. I didn't argue. I just listened. Then I told her about the drink, the lab report, the call with Claire, and everything I'd found. There was a long pause before she said quietly, So what are you going to do with all of it? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know yet. But I knew I had to do something. I decided to speak with Ronald next. He had always been quiet, more passive than malicious. I wondered how much he actually knew. I called him during his office lunch hour and asked if we could meet for coffee. He sounded surprised, but agreed. We met at a small cafe near the university campus, a place neutral and public. I brought the lab report in a sealed envelope, but didn't take it out. Not yet. We talked casually at first. About weather. About Trevor's school. And then I asked him plainly, Do you believe I make Trevor's life worse? He blinked, taken aback. Of course not, he said. But his tone carried hesitation. I nodded slowly and pulled the envelope from my bag, laying it gently on the table. This was in my drink the night of your anniversary dinner. The one Evelyn prepared for me. He stared at it like it might explode. He didn't open it, but he didn't push it away either. She said it was a misunderstanding. He said finally. Said you were mistaken. I looked him in the eye. I watched her do it. I didn't confront her, but I knew. And now you know. Too. His hands tightened around his coffee cup. She's under a lot of pressure, he said weakly. She doesn't always think things through. I let the silence sit between us. Dense and deliberate. I'm not asking you to choose sides, Ronald, I said. I'm asking you to stop pretending she's harmless. He didn't reply, but when he finally stood to leave, he took the envelope with him. That was enough for now. The next turning point came on an otherwise quiet Wednesday. I'd just returned from a strategy session with a school board and was heating leftover lentil soup when the doorbell rang. It was the kind of soft chime that didn't belong to surprises. I opened the door and saw a small package on the mat. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in black ink, across a plain manila envelope. I stood there a moment before picking it up. It was light, unassuming, and slightly warm from the afternoon sun. Inside was a USB drive and a short note that read simply, "You should see this. Amy." I sat down at my desk, closed every other window on my laptop, and plugged it in. There were 5 video files inside, each labeled with a date. The first was from the night of the dinner. A fixed security camera in the kitchen showed Evelyn pulling a small bottle from the spice cabinet and carefully adding it to a wine glass. She looked around, paused, then added something else from her purse. I watched myself enter the kitchen seconds later. The audio was faint, but I could hear her say, "Just for you." I saw myself take the glasses, and I watched Ronald drink from the one meant for me. The second video was from an hour after we left. Evelyn and Ronald were arguing in the kitchen. She was yelling at him for drinking the wrong glass. He shouted back, "You shouldn't have done it in the first place," she hissed. It was harmless. It was just supposed to make her a little sick. Miss that conference. Look unreliable. I paused the video, my hand trembling on the mouse. There it was. Not just intent, but history. A pattern. The third file was 2 days later. Evelyn sat alone on the phone, speaking to someone I couldn't identify. "Mariah's unstable. I think it's time we help Trevor see that. I've already told him she seems distant lately. Probably depressed. He'll start to notice. Maybe it's time to talk about options." My chest tightened. She wasn't just covering her tracks. She was laying new ones. She was trying to make me the problem. The fourth clip was dated months earlier, showing her standing in the same kitchen, speaking to someone off camera. Claire never listened. And look where she is now, alone in some rental. I told her it wouldn't end well. Then a pause. She'll come back. They always do. Eventually. The final video had no sound. Just Evelyn and Ronald, sitting across from each other in the living room. She was talking. He was listening. Then shaking his head. Then leaving the room. She didn't follow. I watched the footage 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat still, absorbing it like a data set. I labeled and time-stamped each file, saved copies to 2 drives. Then I picked up my phone and called Claire. She answered on the second ring. "You were right," I said. "And I have proof." We spoke for 2 hours. She offered to help however I needed. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want truth. I want Trevor to see it clearly. Not just this one moment, but the whole machine she built." Claire paused, then said something I didn't expect. "It won't be enough to show him clips. You'll have to dismantle the story she's told him about you. About herself. That's the real work." She was right. I knew Trevor. He loved his mother. He believed in fairness and reason. He thought people meant well until proven otherwise. And Evelyn had never screamed. Never hit. Never made a scene. Just small redirections. Quiet edits. Smiles that swallowed full truths. I couldn't fight her with noise. I had to fight her with structure, with patience, with proof that unraveled itself in layers too strong to deny. That night, I asked Trevor if we could invite Owen and Claire for dinner that weekend. He was surprised but happy. "I'd love that," he said. "It's been so long since we all sat down together." I smiled and kissed his cheek. "Let's make something nice." I didn't tell him yet. Not about the videos. Not about the note. Not about what was coming. I needed one more piece. I called Amy again and thanked her. "You saved me," I said. She replied, "You saved yourself. I just gave you the mirror." I ended the call. I walked back to my office and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed a single sentence. "This is what manipulation looks like when it wears pearls and says please." Then I began to write the outline. Not of a plan for war, but a structure for light. Something even Evelyn couldn't twist. Saturday arrived with an early chill. The kind that slips through window panes no matter how well the house is sealed. I spent the day preparing the meal. Something hearty and warm. Rosemary chicken. Roasted squash. A pot of wild rice with caramelized onions. Trevor helped with the table, humming softly as he arranged silverware and folded cloth napkins. He was in good spirits, texting Owen updates and asking if Claire needed parking instructions. I watched him move around our kitchen, so eager to make things perfect, so unaware of the weight hanging quietly between us. Claire arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and her usual guarded smile. She hugged Trevor and glanced at me, something knowing in her eyes. Owen and his girlfriend Lena followed, both dressed like they'd come straight from a gallery opening, all dark wool and muted earth tones. The conversation started light. Memories from childhood, stories of shared teachers, the way their dad used to overwater the lawn until it looked like a swamp. I let the laughter rise and fall naturally, then asked everyone to move to the dining room. As we passed dishes and clinked glasses, I could feel the moment approaching. I didn't want to interrupt joy with darkness, but the joy wasn't real if it was built on silence. After dessert, I stood and walked to the small console where I'd placed my laptop. I connected it to the television and opened the folder labeled, "Watch this first." The room shifted. Forks paused midair. I said nothing as the first video began. Evelyn in the kitchen, preparing 2 drinks. May entering, her offering one. The silence grew tighter. Claire's hand slid to her mouth. Owen sat forward, elbows on the table. Then came the footage of Evelyn screaming at Ronald after he drank the wrong glass. Then the phone calls. The manipulation. The pieces none of them had ever seen. I didn't narrate. I let the videos speak for themselves. When the last clip ended, the room was still. I turned off the screen and faced them. "This is not just about that night," I said. "It's about what's been happening for years. To me, to Claire, and maybe to others before us." Owen looked pale, his voice almost breaking, when he finally said, "I didn't know. I always thought. I thought Mom was just protective." Claire let out a short breath. Part laugh, part release. "She was never protecting us," she said. "She was protecting a version of us she could control." Trevor hadn't said a word yet. He sat with both hands folded in front of him, eyes fixed on the space between his plate and the tablecloth. I reached for his hand and asked gently, "Do you believe me?" He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up at me and said, "I believe the footage. I believe the patterns. But I need to know why she would do this." His voice was steady, but there was a break under the words. The kind that only comes from realizing the person you trusted most was never who you thought they were. "She wants control," Claire said quietly. "That's the only why that ever made sense." Owen nodded slowly. "We were raised to think love looked like structure. But this wasn't structure. It was strategy." I said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. What I had feared for so long, that they would choose her over truth, hadn't happened. Not yet. They were still sitting with me. They were still listening. Trevor stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a glass of water. He placed it in front of me. A small gesture, but it carried more meaning than any apology. I drank slowly, breathing in the quiet. For the first time, I wasn't doubting myself in that house. For the first time, I felt seen by more than just myself. Later that night, after Owen and Lena had gone, and Claire had settled into the guest room, Trevor and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "What happens now?" he asked. I turned my head toward him. "That depends on them," I said. "But we don't pretend anymore. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. No more silent harm." He nodded. "Do we tell them?" I exhaled. "We show them. Like we showed you. All of us. Together." He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He pulled the blanket over our shoulders and whispered, "Then I'm with you." We didn't tell Evelyn and Ronald we were coming. Trevor simply texted the family group chat on Monday morning and said we'd like to stop by that evening to talk. No reason. No details. Claire added that she would come too. Ronald responded with a thumbs up emoji. Evelyn replied with, "Of course, dear. We'll have tea and pie." As if nothing had changed. As if we were all still playing house. Before we left, I packed my camera bag. Not just the compact one for field shoots, but the full kit: tripod, lapel mic, high-res lens, backup battery. Trevor watched me and didn't ask questions. When we arrived at the house, everything was too perfect. The table was set for 6. Jazz played softly in the background, and Evelyn greeted us with a silk blouse and practiced warmth. "Mariah," she smiled. "You look radiant. That color suits you." I nodded politely. "Thank you. I brought my gear. I'd like to document our conversation tonight." For clarity. Her smile froze. Ronald looked up from his magazine. "Is that necessary?" he asked. "It is," I said. "We're not here to fight. We're here for truth. And the truth deserves a witness." I set up the tripod in the corner of the living room, adjusted the angle, hit record, and sat back down beside Trevor. Claire and Owen took the chairs opposite Evelyn and Ronald. The air was tight, not hostile, but wary. I looked at Evelyn. "I want to begin with a question," I said. "Do you remember what you put in my glass that night?" Her eyes widened slightly, but her voice was calm. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I made sangria." "Your favorite." I nodded. "And Jason at the lab confirmed that glass had lorazepam in it. The footage shows you adding it before I walked in." I turned slightly and clicked the small remote in my hand. The video appeared on the screen behind us. Evelyn didn't look. Ronald shifted in his seat. "This is absurd," she said quietly. "You're trying to paint me as someone I'm not. I would never harm you." I kept my voice steady. "I don't believe you intended to hurt me physically. I believe you wanted to make me unreliable. You've been doing it subtly for years. This time, it was just more visible." Evelyn's hands clenched. "Trevor," she said, turning to her son, "are you really letting her accuse me like this?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I'm listening, Mom. And I saw the footage. I believe what I saw." She looked stunned, as if the air had been sucked from the room. I leaned forward slightly. "You've done this before. To Claire. To me. To anyone who doesn't play the role you've written." Claire nodded beside me. "You made me think I was ungrateful for wanting to live outside your shadow. You told people I was unstable. And when I confronted you, you said I was dramatic." Evelyn's voice sharpened. "I never said that." I opened a folder and pulled out a printed email. "This is from 3 years ago. You forwarded it to a friend, saying Claire's move was impulsive and probably a phase. That she'd come back when she failed." Evelyn didn't reach for the paper. She just looked at the fireplace. Eyes glassy. Ronald finally spoke. I didn't know about the drug, but I knew about the control. I let it happen. I'm sorry. It was the first time I'd heard regret in his voice. The first time, he didn't try to soften it with context or explanation. Claire's eyes filled with quiet grief. You stood by while she took everything from me, she said. And you called it support. Ronald looked away. Owen cleared his throat. You told me Lena was wrong for me because she didn't come from our world. That she wouldn't last. You made me question everything. Evelyn turned to him. I was trying to protect you. His face tightened. You were trying to preserve your image of what our lives should look like. That's not protection. That's projection. I reached for the flash drive on the table and slid it toward Evelyn. This has the footage. The lab report. And every documented instance I could gather of these patterns. I'm not going to ruin your reputation. I'm not going to make this public, but if you ever interfere in my life again, if you ever try to undermine me behind a smile, I will make sure every person in your circle sees the truth. Evelyn didn't take the drive, but she didn't reject it either. She just sat. Shoulders small, eyes dim. Trevor looked at his parents and said, We're having a baby. Her eyes flickered up. You're going to be grandparents, but you won't get to be part of this child's life unless you respect our choices, our boundaries, and our peace. She didn't speak. Neither did Ronald. When we left that night, no one hugged, no one cried, but no one lied either. In the days that followed, there were no dramatic phone calls, no messages begging for forgiveness. Just silence. A sharp, deliberate silence that filled the space where manipulation used to echo. Trevor didn't ask me to soften, and I didn't ask him to choose. We moved through those days with quiet resolve, cleaning the nursery together, sorting books by theme, folding tiny clothes into neat rows. It was the calmest our home had felt in years, like something had finally stopped pressing down on the walls. Evelyn sent one text the following week. It was short. We hope to be part of the baby's life when you're ready. No apology. No explanation. Just the careful wording of someone used to controlling narratives with absence as much as presence. I read it, showed Trevor, then archived it without reply. We were done playing by rules we hadn't written. Claire called often. Sometimes to check in. Sometimes just to sit with the silence. She told me how strange it felt to no longer carry the weight of being the problem. All those years, she said, I thought I was the selfish one. Turns out, I just wanted air. Owen and Lena stopped by more frequently. He'd become quieter since the dinner. Not withdrawn. I just thoughtful. One night, while standing on our porch after dinner, he said, I used to think loyalty meant defending my parents. Now I think it means protecting truth, even when it's messy. I nodded, understanding too well. Family doesn't mean folding yourself into someone else's shape just because they knew you first. The baby's due date grew closer. With each passing week, I felt a strange mixture of fear and power. I wasn't afraid of Evelyn anymore. I was afraid of becoming her without realizing. Of losing myself in a desire to protect so deeply that it crossed into control. Trevor and I talked about it often. We agreed on boundaries early. No unannounced visits. No unsupervised time. No undermining words dressed as jokes. We weren't going to repeat what we had survived. In early May, a certified letter arrived from a law firm in downtown Seattle. Inside was a deed. The house we'd been renting from Ronald was now legally ours. Transferred without condition. Attached was a short letter. Handwritten by Ronald. No strings. Just closure. For her. For me. For you. I read it twice. Then folded it slowly and placed it in the back of our filing cabinet. I didn't smile. But I felt something loosen. Not joy. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. A release. We never spoke about the footage again. I never published it. Never threatened them again. I didn't need to. They knew what I had. They knew what I was willing to protect. And that was enough. The real shift wasn't in what they gave us. It was in what they couldn't take anymore. Eliza was born in late spring. She came into the world with a cry so loud and clear, it silenced the room. Trevor cried first. I followed. Not from fear or pain, but from the sheer force of starting something, without the weight of someone else's past pressing on it. Evelyn and Ronald visited the hospital 3 days later. They stayed for 15 minutes, brought a pale blue blanket and a small book of nursery rhymes. They didn't touch her without asking. They didn't offer advice. They left without lingering. Later that night, Trevor asked how I felt. I told him I didn't hate them, but I didn't trust them. And that trust wasn't going to be earned by appearances or gestures. It would take years of consistency, honesty, and respect. And even then, it might not come back. He understood. We weren't building a life in opposition anymore. We were building it in truth, in clarity, in the quiet power of not needing their approval. I resumed work that summer, leading a behavioral ethics project across 3 school districts. I lectured on boundaries, influence, and the subtle forms of harm that don't leave bruises but leave marks just the same. I didn't tell my story. I didn't need to. It lived in the way I stood, the way I spoke, the way I refused to diminish the truth for the comfort of others. Some nights, I would sit in the nursery after Eliza fell asleep, watching her breathe, and I would whisper a quiet promise that she would grow up knowing that love wasn't something earned by obedience, that family wasn't defined by fear disguised as protection, that her worth would never be measured by how much she made herself small to make someone else feel big. By autumn, Eliza was sitting up on her own. Her laugh, echoing through the rooms like music, I didn't know I'd been missing. The house had changed too. It wasn't just quieter, it was lighter. Not in sound, but in weight. The energy shifted. We no longer lived on edge, waiting for the next backhanded comment or surprise drop-in. There were no more Sunday obligations. No more pretending at birthday dinners. The silence from Evelyn and Ronald had held. They sent cards for Trevor's birthday and a small package for Eliza's first Halloween. They didn't ask to visit. They didn't ask for photos. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was compliance. And sometimes that's the only kind of peace you get. I was offered a position that fall to lead a multi-district program focused on emotional literacy and boundary education. It meant more travel, more visibility, more responsibility. 5 years ago, I might have hesitated. I might have asked Evelyn if it would seem like too much. I might have gauged Trevor's face to see if it fit her version of what a wife should prioritize. But I'd outgrown that. I said yes before the sentence was finished. Trevor didn't hesitate either. We'll figure it out, he said, rocking Eliza gently as she babbled at a wooden giraffe. There was one afternoon in November that I still think about. I'd been invited to speak at a leadership summit in downtown Seattle. The topic was invisible resistance, the quiet ways people, especially women, are slowed down by environments that don't name their harm. I stood at the podium in a soft navy dress, notes in hand, and began not with statistics, but with a question. What happens when you are loved for your usefulness, not your wholeness? The room stilled. I didn't use names. I didn't tell my personal story. But as I spoke about sabotage wrapped in politeness and control disguised as care, I could see heads nodding. I could see eyes shifting. I was not the only one. I never had been. After the event, a woman approached me, late 50s, gray streaks in her hair. She said, I wish I'd heard that 20 years ago. Maybe I would have chosen differently. I nodded. Not with pity, but with recognition. We are all shaped by what we're taught to tolerate. The work of unlearning that takes a lifetime. That evening, as I walked back to my car, I passed a bookstore and noticed a familiar figure through the window. Evelyn, sitting alone at a table by the window, flipping through a hardcover. She looked smaller, not frail, just less full. She glanced up, and our eyes met. She didn't flinch. Neither did I. I gave a small nod. Not a greeting. Not a smile. Just acknowledgement. She nodded back and returned to her book. That was it. I didn't tell Trevor. There was no need. That moment wasn't about her. It was about me. About knowing I could see her and not feel pulled under. About understanding that power over me had ended long ago, not with a fight, but with a boundary I chose not to lower again. Claire started dating again. Her laughter returned. Not all at once, but in pieces. She came to visit us more often, bringing small gifts for Eliza and stories from her life that didn't need editing for anyone's approval. Owen and Lena got engaged quietly in early December. They didn't host a party, just a dinner for close friends. A small announcement tucked into a holiday card. They said they wanted something real. Something clean. I understood. Trevor and I celebrated our anniversary in the living room. Takeout on the couch. Eliza asleep in the next room. He handed me a simple box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a small silver pendant engraved with one word whole. I didn't ask what it meant. I already knew. We were no longer trying to build something that would be accepted by someone else's standards. We were building something solid enough that it didn't require external validation. And in that quiet, in that stillness, I found what I'd been chasing for years, not permission, not revenge, but ownership of my time, my choices, my name. That was the real win. On a chilly afternoon in late January, an envelope arrived. Heavy, off-white paper, gold-trimmed, the kind meant to feel expensive. Inside was an invitation from Evelyn and Ronald. It read, "Join us for a private dinner, just family. A fresh start." Trevor placed it on the counter and looked at me. "Do you want to go?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I reread the invitation. No manipulative phrasing. No guilt. No veiled expectations. Just 5 words under their names. "We'd like to begin again." We agreed to go, with conditions. We wouldn't bring Eliza. We'd arrive separately, so neither of us felt trapped. And we would leave the moment anything felt like the past. When we arrived, the house was dimly lit, fire crackling in the hearth, music soft and unfamiliar. Evelyn greeted us at the door with a polite, careful tone. Ronald offered drinks without eye contact. The table was set for 4. The first half hour was awkward in a sterile kind of way. Small talk. Neutral subjects. Weather. Work. Traffic. No mention of the footage. No reference to the dinner months ago. Just 4 people pretending not to remember everything they'd said or done. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to see what they had learned. If anything. Evelyn served the meal herself. Ronald waited until dessert to speak directly to me. "We've been thinking," he said, placing his glass gently on the table. "You've done well with your work. Your name's come up in a few circles I trust." I said nothing. I wasn't interested in flattery. A continued. "I've recently stepped down from the board of an educational foundation. They need new leadership, fresh perspective, and someone with a background in behavioral systems." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "We recommended you." I blinked once, not because I was surprised they'd tried to offer something, but because of what they were offering. Not an apology, not ownership, an opportunity. Their opportunity. I smiled politely. "Why?" I asked. Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "Because it's a meaningful platform, and because we believe in repairing what was broken." I nodded slowly. "And would that platform belong to me?" Ronald cleared his throat. "Of course. Though the foundation has deep roots, long-standing expectations." I let the pause stretch. Then I answered without anger. "You don't repair broken things by offering positions that keep the same power in different hands. You repair them by stepping back." Evelyn's lips tightened. "We're trying, Mariah." I looked at both of them. Trying is a process. Control is a reflex. And you're still reaching for it. Trevor reached across the table and touched my hand. Not to interrupt. Not to comfort. But to confirm. He was with me. Fully. I looked back at Ronald. I appreciate the thought. But I built my path. I don't need yours. The room held its breath for a second. Then Evelyn nodded once. Sharp and slow. Understood. They didn't argue. They didn't push. And that silence meant more than any statement they could have rehearsed. After dinner, they didn't ask us to stay longer. They didn't ask when we'd be back. Just walked us to the door, said goodnight, and watched us leave without trying to follow. In the car, Trevor asked how I felt. I thought about it. Clear, I said. Like the last test is over. He nodded. And I looked out at the quiet street. The familiar houses. The lives tucked neatly behind windows. And I'm still not angry. I'm just done. The next day, I returned to work and turned down 2 advisory board roles that didn't align with my values. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing a grant proposal for a mentorship program I'd started building with Claire. We wanted to help young women recognize gaslighting in professional and personal spaces. Not from textbooks, from lived experience. That evening, I fed Eliza while Trevor cooked. The house was warm, filled with the scent of garlic and rosemary. The kind of atmosphere that doesn't look impressive from the outside, but feels like peace. After Eliza fell asleep, I sat on the floor of her room for a while, listening to her breath. Then I whispered something I'd been thinking for weeks. You don't have to win by fighting. Sometimes, you win by walking away and refusing to play. She stirred, then settled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no pull to prove anything to anyone. Spring came back slowly, almost like it was asking permission. The rain eased, the wind softened, and the cherry blossoms along the sidewalks outside our house started to open just wide enough to suggest that nothing stays heavy forever. I spent most of those days in my studio, finalizing the layout for my upcoming series on generational patterns portraits that paired children with elders from different communities, each frame layered with their own handwritten stories. It wasn't just about trauma or recovery. It was about choice, about the stories we decide to pass on and the ones we learn to let go of. The exhibit opened in early April at a small downtown gallery. Trevor held Eliza on his hip, pointing to one of the photos as she babbled nonsense with total authority. Claire came early to help with setup, arranging the prints and proofing the nameplates. Owen and Lena arrived quietly, bringing flowers and almond cookies from a bakery I loved. My parents flew in from Oregon for the day, beaming in a way I hadn't seen since college. They didn't ask where Evelyn was. They didn't need to. The gallery was full that night. Teachers, colleagues, former students, strangers who had seen the flyers and wandered in with curiosity. I didn't give a speech, just greeted each guest with a steady nod and quiet gratitude. Near the end of the evening, just as the lights were dimming slightly for the final hour, Evelyn walked in. She didn't come with Ronald. She came alone, wearing soft gray and a pearl pin I hadn't seen before. She walked slowly, scanning the room like someone trying not to look lost. I watched her move from one portrait to the next, stopping at a photo of a boy standing beside his great-aunt. Both of them looking into the camera without apology. She didn't say anything. She didn't ask for me, and I didn't go to her. She walked the gallery, as if she were visiting something already finished, already decided. At the far end, she paused by the guest book, pulled out a pen, and wrote something without looking up. After she left, I waited until the last guest had stepped outside. Then I walked over to the book. She hadn't signed her name, just 5 words in tight script. You raised the mirror. Well, I read it once. Then I closed the book and turned off the lights. She never contacted us again. No letters, no invitations, no small offerings wrapped in silence. just distance, and for the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission. The absence of her voice wasn't something I feared anymore. It was something I had earned. That summer, I was invited to keynote a symposium on psychological safety in early development. I spoke about systems, about the way emotional harm doesn't need to be loud to be real, about the power of slow erosion, and more importantly, about repair that doesn't require performance. One question from the audience stuck with me. A woman asked, "How do you heal when the people who harmed you never admit what they did?" I paused, then answered plainly. By not needing their admission to believe yourself. By choosing to write the ending even if they refuse to close the chapter. I wasn't trying to be profound. I was just telling the truth. Not the kind of truth that needs to be proven anymore. The kind that stands because it no longer bends to being doubted. Back home, Eliza had started saying again after every bedtime story. Her favorite was the one with the dog who got lost but found his way home by remembering who he was. Each time I read it, she laughed louder at the same parts, clapped for the same page turns, rested her head on my shoulder right before the end. One night, I asked her, "Do you want to tell the story this time?" She didn't hesitate. Dog lost. Though smart? Doggo home. Then she looked at me and added, "Like Mama." I smiled, closed the book, and whispered, "Exactly like Mama." I never told her about the glass, about the footage, about the years of doubt, and the rooms I had to walk through alone. Maybe one day, when she's older, I will. But not to teach her fear. To show her that peace isn't what you get from others. It's what you decide to no longer let them take. And maybe that's the real end. Not Evelyn's silence. Not Ronald's letter. Not even the house or the gallery, or the foundation I turned down. The end is me. Sitting in a quiet room, surrounded by the life I built without asking anyone for permission. Holding my daughter while she learns what story she belongs to. Would you stay silent to keep peace, even if it cost you your voice? Or would you finally speak, knowing that peace built on truth feels nothing like war?